Uh, is this working? This also wait. Jeez. Hey, wow. Is this working? Is it? Yeah, it seems to be working. Wow. Very much surprising. Uh, anyways, I was going to drink something because I realized I haven't. So yeah, let me do that. Thank you very much for your patience. Anyway, uh, supposedly, supposedly, because I haven't really read about it, uh, you shouldn't be drinking cold stuff. Like it does harm to your throat somehow. I I remember. I think it was May, who talked about it very recently, and I didn't know about it. I I literally only drink when I am here at the very least cold water. So I would say it doesn't seem to be that way. At the very least, when you simply take sips instead of continuously drinking as much as you can or something like that. But I don't know. I have literally no idea whatsoever. So yeah, I wish I could say something in those lines to minimally try to understand how that works. I have no clue. Simply, I guess we will see, as always, if if any of that affects in general how the only truly important thing here, how my voice feels and whatnot. I guess. So yeah. Anyway, completely regardless. The real point is here we are. After I don't know, after like 2 weeks, I think something like that. We are back. I don't even know why this this past week I couldn't stream unavoidably. It is hard in general to do anything when you are focused on studying to properly go to the final exams and whatnot. So in many different ways. It was quite problematic, unavoidably. But um, the previous week to that one, I don't know why I didn't. Well, I mean, I was still having to study, and I should be also getting ready to study this very same week. It looks like so. Yeah, I don't know. I don't truly have a clue in all of that, but the reality is, even if I still have to study even more, I hope for this time around to be quite different. I, yeah, I do not care that much about many of the things that I will have to go and try to deal with in the exams. I have already studied for most of them, so sadly, I don't need to keep on preparing more, sadly. And the other subjects, which I haven't even started to read on about, will unavoidably take a lot of time. I don't know. I guess the only real consequence or the only pertaining observation would be something along the lines of. And there is also always something weird about talking so much about anything in general as I try to do here, and later on realized that what I was mentioning ended up being influenced by what I ended up also reading. It was pretty much an amazing discovery. I think the first time I properly realized that, to see that out of nowhere I was bringing up more and more the things that I saw here than not that I saw here, the other way around. I brought up here the things that I was dealing with in the moment, most of the time, simply because I guess in terms of, I think it is called mental economics, something like that. It is easier to bring up what you are the most accustomed to dealing with in any kind of singular instance in which you need to try and bring out, in general, any topic whatsoever. So it makes sense, even more with the structure of this, where it pretty much has no true structure to itself. It correlates with that idea. But I don't know, it simply happens. And the point was, we will see. I have probably, if I had to say, I have to study, for example, um, child-related stuff, because one of the many subjects that I will have, not next week, I also have exams, not next week, in like 2 months, I think so, 3, I have to go and do an exam for a subject called, or similar in English to um, psychology of the development, or something like that, basically, and it's pretty much related. Yeah. The main focus are kids and whatnot, so unavoidably, it seems to be interesting to. It will be very appealing to observe if any of what I am talking about, the things that I talk about, end up being modified simply because of that. I mean, one wouldn't want that to happen, I guess, but if it happens, I literally cannot alter that in any way. So, just to learn to live with that, I guess. Anyway, um, before properly starting, also, I have forgotten about this. I am pretty sure. I wanted to talk about this since the last time because at that point I already knew about this very important piece of information. The problem is, there are too many things to talk about, so I end up forgetting about some of them. Like in this case, because I already had it in my hands, but simply because I was, so to speak, more worried on other stuff, I, I lost myself on distinct discussions and whatnot. And therefore, in this case, I will try to minimally mention that properly because at this point, I don't know, I think like a month ago or something like that, at this point, I I had a discussion with my clinician about one of the many main concerns that I have because certainly in terms of the learning process that anybody can have, there seems to be an incredibly disregarded part when it comes to the subject itself, learning about things. And it is important to consider that properly instead of the optic of how does anybody change based on the amount of information that they intake because, or if, or at the very least, based on how much information they can properly process, on the basis of isn't there a clear limit on how much information can anybody hold inside of themselves, or so to speak, try to understand in any period of time. I know from a creating a little bit more of background of this story. At the very least, on what I have already read on psychology, yeah, there is a very clear distinction on anybody who wants to learn about things might have a better time learning about them, and anybody who seems to have any motivated factor for spending their time itself on the different subjects that they are studying, as long as that motivation is strong enough, will be capable of learning in general. And one of the many concerns of psychology is also how to create this type of motivation inside of those who lack that spark to minimally try anything of that sort. Inside of that, there is a very big problem. I consider that myself, and that is that sadly, people overview. I don't even understand why it happens that people forgets the reality of And is there a physical limit to how much anybody can learn? Not, not in terms of if anybody has not the capacity to process information based on the concept of every single piece falls on its particular appropriate place. Every single thing makes sense to you. All of that functions correctly without any problem whatsoever. The problem is, or the question that for me remained unanswered until that point was, but is there any kind of physical limit and any kind of point in which a human should get worried about, so to speak, trying to fit too much information? I mean, one of the main, yeah, I guess one of the main stories that I like to hear has at a certain point, this guy ends up even complaining about how problematic it was being for him to be consuming so much information, because it could very well happen, based on what I understood from that your brain ends up trying to cram too much new information and you are not even processing what is happening. That's everything that I had on my hands. The proper response that came after that proposal, so to speak, was indeed, you can very much, happily enough, learn about as many things as you want, and as long as you truly want to understand and are capable of dealing with both the fatigue that is created because of learning and also even more, you have the possibility of surviving the process itself of trying to integrate all of that information in terms of you make sense of what you are processing. Therefore, you have new compartments of information that could be used to store new pieces of data for your already existing model, as long as you can create anything of that sort properly and deal with the consequences of doing that. And that's the medical response, not an assumption. You should be capable as an individual to endure hundreds, if not thousands of hours learning whatever you want. And that was very much a main concern, because in the discussion of also, how are you even sure that there isn't any point in which you might be hurting yourself from overdoing it every single day? It has nothing to do with that. You don't even need to worry about that. If you are truly enjoying the process of learning, if you are truly giving yourself time to discover information and what's not, it won't happen. It won't be a concern that you need to have. So, it seems to be that at the very least, for now, based on all of those things, indeed, anybody who can survive the process of learning can fit even more information. No matter what they do, it simply will happen. It unavoidably will happen, so to speak. And that was also dogs probably going to start barking anyway. That was my main concern. I think, yeah, probably, so to speak, there is this huge question of what do I truly want to learn about that most people at some point or another take the time out of their life to discover. And once you discover that, the problem is sadly you are shown that in almost, if not all of the cases, there is perhaps too much information for you to try and process in any field. So you might as well need thousands upon thousands of hours working on anything. In that very same case, or very much similar to that, happens something like this, in which indeed trying to understand and trying to discover anything might as well be an incredibly exhaustive and overly extended, I would say, process that requires time. But the problem is, at which point might that be negative? Or might that stop being useful? If, even if for you what you're learning seems to be logical, not for the person, but for the most observable thing, for the brain itself, there is no way in which you can keep inputting information and being capable of processing that and storing all of the data, so to speak, that is contained inside of what you're observing into any neuron whatsoever. Okay, the response is it seems there isn't any clear point, at the very least. I guess, based on the human condition so far, it pretty much makes sense that we haven't truly studied how much can anybody learn on one particular truly obsessive topic that they have, and see or find out what are the limits of learning in all of that. But yeah, I wanted to talk about it before. I forgot. I shouldn't have to. Yeah, I shouldn't have forgotten about it, I guess. I did so because of errors, I guess. But here it is. Thank you very much for your patience. With that, I guess, yeah, I don't truly have that much more to say in regards to completely unrelated stuff. So maybe let me let me think for a second while I also sip water. Wow, the most surprising element, H2O. Wow. So yeah, anyway, let me let me let me see. I mean, I did mention my visit to the clinician, so I guess I should also try to talk to some degree um, to something that might as well be as important as that in the field of maybe, if I remember that. I don't think I can simply illustrate that with words, sadly. Uh, there is. I had already hints, and not simply hints. There is a realization that you have once you deal with that yourself, and you find out through your own experience that somehow certain types of neck, so to speak, pains and cramps that can occur in the back of the neck end up leading not only to head cramps and to different types of momentary problems, but also to something quite a lot more important, that is that you can pretty much lose in general performance capacities, because I think it was related to how the brain stops or needs to allocate more energy on disregarding this type of constant annoyance that is happening, in this case in the back of your head and such. So all of that might as well be interesting to discuss, but in the future, because sadly it needs to be illustrated. I cannot simply, or I mean, we can do it. The reality is we can always simply mention that. In some cases, visual examples and representations to assist with what is being said might as well be welcomed. They provide quite a lot more ground for what is being said than just random words. So yeah, basically that. Thank you very much. So yeah, I if I remember at some point at all of this, and I have the possibility of mentioning that, I will be pretty happy. If I don't, I sadly won't. I guess a missed opportunity that there is no way to gain back. Anyway, that's everything so far in regards, now for real, to unrelated stuff. So yeah, I think yeah, we don't. I don't have that much more to say. We can properly begin with the story. We I had one particular concern, or one main concern, and that was to properly try and create something that exists more than in just one particular stream, um, so to speak, or more than in just one singular video, because certainly the reality is it's pretty good to hear self-contained topics. It's pretty much like watching a movie when you have the possibility of realizing that, oh wow, this begins, transcurs, and finishes all in one sitting, so to speak. And that's quite a nice thing to do if the discussion itself was to be short enough. But sadly, reality shows even more with topics that require true consideration, that you can't do that with most of the things that are part of the general life and whatnot. So I guess instead of that very same realm, instead of that very same discussion, something like this also falls into place. That is, we have, I feel like we have the necessity to continue with this idea of what are human efforts and what's a proper way to understand them, so to speak. Because yeah, I have I hope I have mentioned that before. There is a very interesting way of structuring what you're talking about. That is, you can settle as many bases for what you are explaining, and once you have given enough foundational ideas, the way in which you can move through any particular development of them becomes a lot softer and a lot swifter also in terms of rapidness, because you get the possibility of moving through the connections that might seem apparent at first glance, or might seem easily understandable simply due to the closeness of the different concepts in a way in which no other type of discussion could allow that. If you were to properly, once again, lay down what you are talking about, and that requires time, but the benefit or the main goal of doing something of that sort ends up being an expansion upon the way in which you communicate about the different ideas and you unravel the concepts themselves in a more sophisticated manner, not because of sophistication itself is meaningful, but rather because in this case, even more complex ideas of this sort bring pretty much to an incredibly advantageous point the understanding of certain topics of concern. So, in that very same degree, trying to continue with this whole thing of the human efforts and whatnot should be regarded as something that might as well create the foundational values for many different ideas that talk about the subject in general of a human being, or the generic subject of a human being, so to speak, in which, after having considered properly enough the different points of the discussion, anybody could try to say, or should be at the very least allowed to say, I did understand what this was about, and I did gain the insight into this one particular field. So, with all of that, it seems pretty much motivated or properly justified, so to speak, to try and properly take time in trying to unravel all of those things. I think. So, anyways, I wanted to say, I think last time, on so to speak, the first part of this, there wasn't anything truly new. There wasn't any introduction of any particular surprising idea or anything like that. It simply happened that we. I think I did, so to speak, introduce most of the main things and not that much more. Um, Also, welcome, Savannah. I hope you are well. I think, yeah, certainly. I did generate in many ways, or I did cover in many different fronts the most shortened ways of discussing this, but not any particular proper deep dive, so to speak. I think I did at the very end. The problem of also having done it so long ago, I quite forgot what was the final parts in which I deepened or in which we ended up truly exploring the topic. I guess it was along the lines of probably, I think so, trying to understand how all of these things that are related to learning work and all of these human efforts compared to what the true objective might be and what's not. So all of that could be pretty much considered as something that was finished there, because there is something else that today in particular I wanted to talk about. I was, I think, after thinking enough about it itself, I found a proper way to try and structure all of that. And the reality is, gladly enough, in many different forms, this thing that is education seems to have something interesting enough to say or to in which we can judge it, so to speak, when it comes to the human efforts. The reality is the educational system in which most, if not every single one of us, in the at the very least as of nowadays, 2024, the present day, um, is brought up and is taught many of different lessons, has different ways of teaching things that might as well not be as efficient or useful as they could truly be if any kind of educational system were to be based more on different systems of values compared to the ones that we use nowadays, sadly. And all of that ends up being a necessary point of observation if we are trying to talk about efforts, because sadly, there is a pretty well known discourse about how if your efforts were to be taken as important, if your interests in any kind of field were to be regarded as truly necessary, or if your attention was to be in any way something meaningful, hmm, how could something of this sort be in any way truly a contributory factor to your development, so to speak, or instead be a negative influence on what your potential is? Something of that sort requires a proper analysis, because certainly even more after I yeah, the reality is I think it comes mostly from the cynicism of most people's life, that out of nowhere you even justify not only trying to discuss something like this, but negatively seeing discussion of this sort, in which out of nowhere, yeah, I have my own desires, I have my own aspirations, but you know what? The biggest problem isn't the mind, the biggest problem is the whole educational system, is the whole system itself, because it allows the educational system to survive. All of that is the problem. Not me, who couldn't in any way exercise my own freedom and my own will to accomplish what I desire. No, it is everything else. That's why I consider minimally trying to observe something like that might be necessary. So yeah, that's, I guess, the justification for what we are going to try and do here, so to speak. It takes time. Unavoidably, it takes time. But it doesn't mean that it is going to be still useless. Um, I guess just a little bit of patience. Yeah. Um, the problem is truly where do we begin? But I think something along these lines should be fine. When we talk about human efforts, we tend to consider many times that what matters the most is the individual human will and the individual experience of the subject inside of its own field of perception, so to speak. What gets created inside of any individual without the influence of anything else, and what gets motivated by the individual and by its different desires without any sort of external motivating factor. Sadly, and all of that is to a certain degree true, but in many other ways it isn't even close to the reality. Sadly, as animals in general that are socially adapted to survive, so to speak, And as animals who are obligated to maintain social relationships, it cannot happen that any human being can survive without taking into consideration the rest. So it's at this point, it should become a little bit easier to understand why. Then there are different. Trying to not spend so much time here. We are not going to get on the discussion of why, but there are many different systems which exist to assist the person in their own existence, so to speak, and which exist to basically bring as many commodities as they can to the individual in ways that allows them to grow in even better directions and in even better fields to try and see if the biggest concern of what is in general all of these different ways of organizing our societies, seeing if there is any possibility of ensuring that we can have great people doing great things, and at the very least, even if they are not doing great things, they are aspiring towards great things. Inside of those many systems, one of the biggest ones, or I, I would argue probably that the biggest one itself, besides 40, I guess yeah, certainly I haven't truly stopped to think about it in that way, but I will argue that besides the economical system in capitalist societies, besides that, there is no other way of saying, not a way of saying, there is no other direction in which you could try to argue that anything is as important as the educational system itself, which, even in the most strict of the, so to speak, oppressive societies exists, even in those type of systems, the educational system is still kept alive in different ways. Obviously, there is a sad realization here. The way in which it gets perpetuated throughout those periods, throughout those experiences, throughout all of that, is quite different from the normality. It's sadly something very negative in many forms, in the least quote unquote free societies. The way in which the educational system gets, yeah, or is allowed to survive, instead of a tool for the allowance of creativity, it is rather a tool for domestication and similar. But once again, it isn't really our main concern here. It's luckily enough, we have nothing to do with that. Yeah, the reality is, those should pretty much be true concerns of anybody, and even more, the proper way to see them. Also, please say hi to my beautiful dogs, which need to work, because if not, I guess they are going to die. Um, it is pretty much a necessary thing to contemplate, but not for this, not at the very least for this particular occasion, or not at this point of the discussion. Not here. That's the point that I'm trying to get at. Once again, going back then, what are we truly trying to talk about? Educational systems. the possibilities that should get created by them, the different messages that get reinforced by them, and the biggest discussion that should get properly observed, why they should in any way survive, or why they why they might be considered something interesting besides the most obvious point of these things allow simply people to obtain a piece of paper that certificates their validity in this particular field of knowledge. Besides that, the most negative and common way in which people try to view these things, sadly, besides all of that, incredibly, I guess reduction is the way of seeing this discussion. What is the real view that anybody could try to have, and what is the real advantage point that could be extracted from trying to observe the education? Getting educated in general, why is it something that might as well be in any way useful enough? Also, hello Crespian, I hope you are well. Okay, why is it in any way an interesting idea? Why is it in any way something that I don't like to use allegories that much. There is a certain degree of problems with utilizing those kind of resources. After all, very much to the highest degree, the moment in which you open the door, so to speak, to different types of ways of referencing a concept indirectly, you might as well be inviting also other things that fly under the radar and which you might, in many different ways, not want. I guess in this case, there is no other way of discussing this, sadly. Being capable of observing why education is in any manner a useful tool to have in your hands moves beyond the simple point of, indeed, people can learn, wow, the most basic stuff, the most incredibly basic stuff, or people gets validated into their particular fields. Still, nothing more than a reductionist point, as I said before. The moment in which you can grasp the concept behind the process of learning, and even more, the already created structures that had been made inside of the different societies of this world in regards to this whole idea of this whole system that tries to predicate in different but at the very same time not so distant ways, referring to meritocracies based on the achievements and whatnot. And the moment in which you can properly place inside of that puzzle the whole idea of how education seems to play such a huge role is the instant in which, as a human being, anybody who tries to justify enough their adventure and seems to be struggling with the whole ordeal in general of trying to see how to move forward gets allowed the possibility of finally, for once, having in their hands a minimally proper explanation of why certain things are the way they are, beyond the most basic and crude, as I said before, reduction is the way of seeing things, which doesn't truly accomplish anything at all. So in this case, why is it necessary to try and see education as something beyond the most basic foundational value, so to speak, is when we are discussing our efforts, when we are trying to discuss in any degree what pertains to the reality of people, so to speak, human beings, so not something so abstract. It shouldn't be something that requires so much attention. When we're trying to talk about people, if you can't evaluate and realize with enough awareness why taking the time out of your life in general, because I wish it was simply a day, but it requires quite a lot of fucking time, sadly. The moment in which you can justify taking time out of your life to the discovery of the different things that will lead you towards the goals that you have is the moment in which you can also see how it might be achieved. Because there is something, and here I remember an incredible talk that I had with a friend. In this case, I remember we used to discuss this idea of, sadly, there isn't any real way in which you would taught how you can properly learn. There is if one of the many things that I am not promising here even is how you can learn better, or which way is the most optimal way in which you can learn. Even if we are trying to talk about as an extension of what is human efforts, the process of acquiring knowledge and whatnot, and different systems that allow for such a process, something that in no way can be properly explained is the process of obtaining the information, being capable of gaining all of that for your particular purposes, and being capable of utilizing all of that for your personal interest, basically. And the sad reality, I think so, not because it truly is sad, but rather because it simply cannot happen in any other way in the modern world. What gets revealed once you try to consider it properly is, sadly, at the very least, nowadays, you don't have the possibility of getting told which method is the best. Because so far, based on everything that we have discovered, the only real piece of advice that gets properly circulated, and not in any kind of field, sadly, it doesn't even happen to that degree. Some people don't even have the possibility of realizing by themselves that things beyond the most subjective part of the experience exist. In general, what is the most valuable piece of information for this kind of discussion is the only thing that matters when it comes to learning is being capable of finding a method that suits you. So far, when we are talking about learning, at least in the present, in the future, we might hope for it to be different, but in the present, there is literally no way in which anybody can harness a particular method and claim that it works the best compared to any other method whatsoever. These methods will take a little bit longer than what I wanted to explain, but it has to do sadly with the different subjectivities of the individual are what order and alter the different ways in which many pieces of information get received, perceived, and properly stored inside of the mind. This is valuable because it might as well allow you to understand then, if you can get that basic principle, that there are some things that by default, based on your condition as an individual subject yourself, you might have an easier time, 10 times of an easier time, learning something that truly catches your attention, something that truly seems to be catering to you, something that truly has potential for anything in your eyes, compared to what doesn't, compared to what is in no ways meaningful enough. But there is also, I think I already mentioned that before, in a different kind of discussion today, there is also another part of this experience, of this whole process, and that is, happily enough, you have also the possibility of realizing a lot of the times that indeed not only what you want and what you truly wish to learn can be properly processed. Not only that, but also you get the possibility of discovering, so to speak, or arriving at the conclusion of, and also, even if what you are trying to learn doesn't seem to be interesting in the whole void of your existence compared to that piece of information that you have to harness, even if that is true, in the whole field of interconnectedness, the moment in which the subject gains the possibility of justifying enough their time spent on any particular piece of knowledge, no matter how bland and meaningless the content by itself of that particular piece of information is, no matter how much of that nature that one piece of content has, it is completely guaranteed to happen that the subject will gain the possibility of learning about this one particular interest as much as they want. Once again, there is a certain problem with that, and that is sadly, we haven't gained so far enough tools to properly express that in as many ways as it needs to be expressed, because we are trying to slowly arrive at any conclusion. In the educational system itself, there are many, many things that make no fucking sense to try and learn. When you consider simply the void of what you're learning towards the objective that you are pursuing and towards the different constitutory parts of your learning process, not even designed by you, but imposed upon you by an educational system which you are simply a small piece, so to speak, yet another participant, not a completely moderating part of it. Simply another one of the subjects that goes through that. In this case, it might well be seen as a failure. I think that's kind of the problem with trying to talk about this. Yeah, I think the reality is it might as well be a failure that something like this needs to be explained by somebody who is observing from the outside the system itself, and from somebody who is from outside basing their own judgment, so to speak. It should be apparent at daylight, so to speak. It should be something that anybody can understand by themselves, and it should be something that anybody could realize at any moment if they want to. Not something that requires contemplation or whatever. It should be something that comes as easily as it is for anybody to say, oh yeah, if it is, I don't know, based on prior experiences, if it is around 1 p.m., then it means that it probably is the hottest outside. No matter which day is it, no matter where exactly I am living, because at 1 p.m., it simply means that it will be hotter. The very same thing with no matter which subject I am learning, even if there are pieces of it that I am dealing with that make no sense altogether, the moment in which I can realize enough justifying factor for this piece of information that I am now forced to acquire, I can swiftly traverse through this whole experience and be capable of gaining what I need to in order to move forward, in order to not be annoyed anymore whatsoever by the different parts of that. I do consider that to a certain degree a loss, but I have already quite moved away from the topic. The topic itself is simply learning and educational systems inside of what we are talking about. Main topic being human efforts. So yeah. Anyways, that I guess is for another day. But yeah, let me drink some water before I continue. I guess let me try to drink something before I fucking die. Also, at some point I lost, I don't even know why, frames. I wish I had an idea onto why it simply happened, I guess. Anyways, welcome, Stan. I hope you're well. I hope you are well. Also, I know you said you didn't want to make schedules anymore. I pretty much recommend you to make them because I already forgot what you stream and I haven't been capable of catching you live. I mean, even if you don't want to make schedules, maybe make like a tiny tweet, something saying I'm live, please. Thank you very much. Anyways, continuing. Moving on, going back. Topic is learning. Topic is acquisition of knowledge, education, educational systems, whatnot. Well, I mean, yeah, indeed, sadly, it makes sense. We are overly, we are around the holidays, so yeah, most people don't have time for them. Indeed, that's completely right. I don't have anything to truly say against that, but maybe in the future. Anyways. I guess the real point was trying to be, or yeah, we have simply set the basis of people can learn the things that they want the moment in which they can justify doing so, because they also can learn the things that they do not see as necessary, because something that is predicated upon any human experiences, the justifications that are created by the individual can motivate them to accomplish many different things which might at first not seem useful enough, even if these things are completely annoying to do, because the desired object of their true aspiration lies within this particular basis or this particular, so to speak, condition, which also needs to be met. All of those things play an incredibly huge role and an incredibly important one in many of the human experiences which we do not even try to properly observe. Up to that point, there is nothing new, and there is nothing truly surprising being said. But the discussion isn't simply about, oh yeah, you can learn, you should try to learn. No. I said it before. Before I even truly began with this, luckily enough, in a different context of based even on what the medical information has revealed, learning should in no way be something that gets stopped simply because you have done it too much time or for too much of an extended period. One of the many things that will unavoidably happen for anybody who has an interest in learning is that you will need to properly process what you are absorbing and to be capable of expressing all of that in a meaningful way, for you to be capable of realizing if what you have been absorbing has been truly integrated inside of you or not. But that doesn't mean that you can in any particular way accomplish the understanding of what you are pursuing. It shouldn't be a correlated factor, so to speak. It's simply the reality of, well, yeah, I want to try and learn about this thing, therefore I need to see not only if what I am learning is useful for what I am trying to pursue, but also if the way in which I am learning about this thing is allowing me to understand it properly. That is incredibly evident if you take that basis and you compare that with what the educational systems themselves provide, that are different ways of creating checkpoints, so to speak, for the individual to test themselves against the pieces of information that they should have been capable of absorbing based, and that's kind of a related but at the very same time different discussion, and something that happens most of the time sadly is the system itself in which most people find themselves in doesn't even contemplate the highest performer. The educational systems have been based since almost at this point 2 centuries on the individuals who perform the worst. That means if you have any minimally average capacity, cruising through the system should be incredibly easy for you. Also, before I continue going, welcome, Ron. I hope you're well. I hope you're feeling nice. Very good to see you here. Have a nice day. Now continuing. As I was saying, the problem itself is people forget that the system isn't based around the most intellectual. One of the very few cases in which something like that supposedly happens is in the highest performing institutes, which at the very same time, quite funnily enough, are not even truly aligned that way most of the time. But once again, because they are so private, that they have so many different prerequisites and whatnot, most people don't even have the possibility of realizing that. Most people, I guess, sadly, as a short distraction here, most people forget that something like Harvard doesn't ensure that you're going to be an amazing. For example, Harvard Law School doesn't mean that you are going to be the most successful lawyer ever. Or going to MIT doesn't mean that you are going to be one of the best scientists, be it natural or social scientists ever. It doesn't work in that way. One of the, I think, one of the biggest problems is of the way in which the individual is thought to conceive education is, and the way or the roots from which you come dictate the place to which you are going to grow. It has no correlation whatsoever, and it has no necessity of being that way, beyond the most obvious point of it is going to be easier for you to be successful in the very same place in which you do. Wow, that is nothing new. That means nothing. That is the most obvious thing. What is going to be the easiest thing? To stay in the same place or to spend your energy and try to move across the world and obtain something incredibly more complex that will require a lot more efforts? Wow, it isn't even a question, it is an incredibly obvious response. The thing that requires the less energy is the thing that will allow you to obtain the quote unquote best results. But if you cannot even justify the process of taking any kind of risk for what you say that you wish to accomplish, what is even the point of trying to argue later on that you didn't accomplish what you said that you wanted to? Everybody has some problem to some degree that doesn't let them fully realize their potential. One of the biggest problems is going back to this whole discussion of, sadly people doesn't even gain the possibility of realizing that they have in so many ways tools to materialize their efforts into something meaningful enough. It happens that nobody even tries to care about what they might be, because it is better to follow the already existing narrative of, I cannot in any way accomplish anything, there are so many hard problems for this reality. I do not need to be dealing with them. I cannot deal with any of those things. I cannot try to solve any of those problems. They are so hard. The point isn't to try and simply say, oh yeah, this completely negative way of looking at the world is right. The point is try to create anything meaningful. Do you know how easy it is? That is one of the most wonderful realizations of anybody's life, that it is incredibly easy to accomplish what you truly want to, the moment in which you realize nobody can even try to aspire something like what you have truly observed. If what you are observing is particular enough, and it doesn't need to be based on the once again basis of I am going to have the most unique dream. No, there are so many things to do in life. There are so many ways in which anybody could go that it is unavoidable to realize at some point or another in life that you have an infinite degree of possibilities. So many ways in which you could try to move towards anywhere, and so many actions which you could try to take and which you could try to minimally pursue. And instead, the problem becomes, we are discussing, there isn't anything else that I have started to realize is as boring as somebody saying, the educational system has failed me. No, you have somehow placed yourself inside of an incredibly depressive point of view. You have somehow robbed yourself out of the possibility of understanding things, because everything is so hard in life, everything is so incredibly complex. I cannot believe it. I cannot learn. I cannot try to obtain information. Where does it even happen that somebody can properly argue that what they wish to have in their hands cannot happen in ways in which it has already been shown that seems to work? It isn't a system crafted only for the privileged, not in the present era. It happened to be that way 300 years ago, And that is true. But we are not living in the past anymore, where now everybody needs to try so hard and struggle every single day. If you were to place your mind on trying to learn something, if you were to place your mind on trying to properly realize with your efforts any kind of goal that you have, you will realize it can happen. The only problem is, no, you know, there is something hidden inside of what is being tried to be said here. There is something hidden inside of the educational system, which I cannot see. I cannot make sense out of it by myself. Yes, you can. Yes, you fucking can, and anybody can. Anybody has that initial possibility. Anybody is given that tool by themselves and for themselves to try and realize that it isn't a system that is incredibly complex or intertwined in secrets and unavoidable realities that will never get unveiled by anybody. The only problem is obviously that they are embedded in, do you want the proper terms, meta narratives that cannot be properly talked about because they disrupt the course of the experience of the subjects which experience them, so to speak. If you are being told out of nowhere that the education that you are being given will dictate the way in which you are going to integrate out of the job that you will be performing in the whole society based simply on the different subjects which create the course that you are following, you are going to out of nowhere start judging incredibly hard what you are being told. And you are going to notice sometimes even how you are being biased towards certain directions, and you are being modified to not be allowed to perceive this field or that other particular field as yet another possibility with as many potentialities as the one that you chose. But it doesn't mean that you cannot by yourself reach that conclusion, and it doesn't mean that you don't have the necessity to do so. That's the worst part of hearing anything about that. That people forget that they also have a necessity, and they have, so to speak, a fucking job to do by themselves inside of the systems that allow them to exist. It doesn't mean that you cannot do nothing. It happens. That's the most common thing, that the systems nowadays allow people to do nothing, because it also has been shown that at the end of the day, at the very least, if people are doing nothing, you will allow yourself to remain in power, and you will allow problems to not be as big as they could be if individuals were capable of truly realizing what the problems and what the truly necessary evils to defeat are. But it doesn't mean that you need to conform. I hate the moment in which out of nowhere a lot of things reduce to a piece of conformist media or conformist mentality, in which, you know, I have my efforts, but you know, life is so incredibly hard. It takes so much time, and it takes so much effort to accomplish anything. I might as well not try to I might as well not try to truly gain anything, because, you know, when I want to do something, so many things seem to be against me, and so many things seem to be thrown at me that I cannot truly accomplish what I want. Life is so full of difficulties that I cannot really gain what I want. It's so hard, and I cannot make sense out of why I have it so hard. It's literally one of the most useless pieces of the modernity, to see how accepting we are of such ways of thinking. There is nothing more depressive than to see somebody only thinking about themselves as if they were the only ones who are in the correct part of the world. And even if you are suffering from the worst kind of punishments from the reality, that doesn't mean in any kind of way that you cannot gain what you wish to. The moment in which you are capable of observing, realizing, and holding onto reality, the most important part of life, that you are given the possibility of doing what you truly wish to, the moment in which your efforts align with everything else that exists for them to work, something that isn't devoid of assistance from the outside. One of the we're talking about education. One of the many things that should be obvious the moment in which you retire at the very least from education is the capacity to exist in cohesion with the rest of the society itself. And why is that to any degree important? Because if you are not capable of not I hate that you cannot say use. The moment in which you say use, well, what? You're talking about manipulation. You're talking about a negative way of influencing people. No, no. The moment in which you can realize that everybody has potential, the moment in which you can realize that anybody can also serve the purpose that you are pursuing, and the moment in which you can realize you can hold inside of your own hands what you say that you wish to and share it with others so that they can also aspire to that very same goal that you define as important and necessary to accomplish, is the moment in which you can see how everybody has, to a certain degree, usefulness, and the moment in which you can realize that all of that can also be expressed not only by you. One of the biggest and most important parts of existence is to see and to be capable of realizing that if you can live this world the moment in which you die and have impacted whichever is left behind after that with a message important enough so that other people can in any minimal way be capable of mobilizing themselves towards what you pointed at and towards what you shown to be a necessity, or even better, if we were capable of solving such a problem so that nobody has any more to deal with certain situations that were accepted before, is the moment in which you have accomplished what might as well be called the purpose of existence or whatever. And so many people are not even willing to take time out of their day to consider anything like that. It's such an incredibly depressing observation to see and to hear something like that happen every single day. There are so many ways in which things could go in the proper direction, and it doesn't mean that there are not problems in the way, but it doesn't also mean that the problems are the only thing that removes you from obtaining what you want. The mentality which gets created outside of the education that you receive is also as important or even bigger than what you are trying to learn about and what you are trying to educate yourself about in any field. No matter what you are using your time to try and nurture your own mind towards the proper comprehension of, the moment in which you allow the negativity of your surroundings, the negativity of the way in which other people see what gets said, the moment in which you allow all of those things to be created and to be fully placed instead of trying to have any kind of agency of your own, is the moment in which you will unavoidably lose. And the reality is, no, you cannot say that it will be bad. You cannot say that it will be negative for you to be paying so much attention to the outside. Do you want to be yet another one who has to crash against the wall of failure to see for yourself that indeed it was that way? It doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to be, so to speak, in more basic terms, in ancient terms. It doesn't mean that the individual doesn't have the possibility of being with the police and being with the society itself, with the rest of the group. It means that the individual doesn't need to be completely embedded in what the police thinks, because the police doesn't possess the capacity to think by itself any meaningful thing enough that justifies the efforts that allow it to exist. The problem ends up being that throughout the experience of any individual, it gets somehow told by this very same police, this group of people, that or particular view is the correct one. There is no view of any group that can be fully taken as the correct one in such matters. Even worse, one of the biggest lies that happens inside of that field is sadly that the way in which the different methods of, and there is no other word to use here, manipulation happen is throughout the different communications that are constantly every other day being created and sustained. The moment in which you are shown and the moment in which you are given the reality of maybe and just maybe. If this thing that is being talked about here were to be in any other way considered and were to be in any other manner observed, maybe I will realize if there is any kind of meaningful idea here, or maybe not. Maybe I will fail, but it doesn't even get allowed to exist. Such a bridge, such a minimal gap of possibility. It always needs to be something that squanders the individual efforts and something that goes against the individual aspirations, because at the very end of the day, what would be better than the allowance of the very same groups who can only perpetuate their own existence and nothing else? If what you have already keeps surviving, at the very least you ensure that thing to be throughout time a non-variant constant, an incredibly solid piece in which you can cement yourself. But it doesn't mean that it is right to do so, or it is even worse, the correct thing to accept for you to not try and see outside of the group from which you are standing on, which allows you to exist nowadays. It doesn't mean that the society which tells you, yeah, you know, it's fine to be negative, is incorrect when it says something like that. It doesn't mean in any kind of way that it is okay for you to give up simply because you had some problems, you know? I had some problems and I cannot continue anymore. It doesn't mean that it is right for you to say that. The problem is nobody can properly say anything like that, because at the very same time now you are somehow going against what is the natural thing and what seems to be the properly acceptable message of, yeah, you know, you had such a hard time. Anybody has a hard time. Life is fucking hard. No matter what you ask to anybody, even the most protected of the childs can at some point or another identify instances in which they had a bad time. Life is comprised of 1,000 different bad moments with a handful of nice ones inside of them. The human itself cannot be satisfied by many of the different things that happen inside of their own life, sadly, because the subjectivity which we are receiving in no way can be something that fulfills most of the different souls in this plane, sadly. But the reality is, even if that is true, even if that is completely right, you have no necessity whatsoever of seeing it that way and accepting it as the only message that exists. To give up on the possibility of minimally trying to pay attention to anything else is to, and that's the worst part, to lose out on the experience that is beyond that, and to lose out on the beautifulness of life that lies beyond the mere moment of, yeah, you know, I had a hard time. Indeed, everybody has a hard time in one way or another. But what is meaningful is the possibility of having an even greater one, the moment in which you can accept the nature of what is bad and the nature of what feels horrible. It doesn't happen that people, no matter how much you learn, there isn't going to be a point in which no difficulty is going to appear. The only thing that might appear is enough notions inside of your head so that you can properly navigate around the difficulties of life, but it doesn't mean even then that they are not going to appear. It simply means you were capable of harnessing enough tools to deal with as many of the situations that are bound to exist in your reality and nothing else. Even the most content of the people inside of this world are simply people who have to deal with the hardships of life. It is one of the worst things itself to hear yet again something along the lines of, yeah, it it, it, it is so complex to do anything. It is so meaningless to try and aspire towards anywhere. I think I know. I read that. I do not want to simply be Hitler because at the very same time it kind of robs the proper message of its importance, you know? Um, because there are some things that minimally require patience to be said. Like, no, sadly, the world isn't complex. And sadly, the world itself isn't in any way hard. It is a beautiful place to live in. And it is one of the best experiences to have. It is literally what allows everything else to exist. At least so far, we haven't developed a secondary life, so to speak, in which you can submerge yourself and not think about the present anymore. Even if you have the resources to submerge in the virtuality and the things that aspire to be like that more, there is no way for you to not be part of the human experience so far. Sadly, in one way or another, you're bound to deal with that. And the reality is, one of the many messages that gets predicated, I already said it before, of it is hard, doesn't truly correlate with reality at all. Doesn't correlate with what anybody could experience at all. There are not that many complex things. I remember, I think it took me probably 100 of hours or so to understand something along those lines of a guy said, sadly, it isn't hard. It isn't complex at all. And it is simply a lie, you know? It is one of the best lies to believe. And it is one of the most satisfying one to use constantly. Because if you have to realize for yourself that indeed many of the situations which exist in reality are simply the way they are for you to solve them and nothing else, it doesn't mean that the course of action isn't going to take effort. Doesn't mean that. It simply means there are solutions to the things that you are seeing, to the things that you are experiencing. Can you properly apply yourself to them? And it's as simple as that. Most people can solve the situations that they found themselves in. There are very few problems which cannot be solved that way. And I guess even worse, sadly, most of those kind of situations, most of those problems don't allow people who are truly suffering them to be here with us today, so to speak, in many different forms. So, simply having the possibility of trying to contemplate anything of that sort should be to any degree an indicator that indeed you have the capacity to have an easy time, so to speak. Coursing through life, doing what you wish, is not so hard The problem, I guess, is finding something that you truly feel satisfied with, unavoidably. But that isn't that isn't your problem. That is the problem of probably 90% of the world, 99% of the world. If not even worse, I mean, at the very least, one of the realizations is, at the very least, you have the opportunity of thinking for yourself. What is it that you want? There are some people who don't even have the possibility of thinking tomorrow if they are going to be alive because they haven't secured enough things today to sustain themselves for the rest of the journey that is to keep themselves afloat for yet another day of existence. To have the possibility of contemplating things of that order is something that doesn't properly get discussed as beautiful, as important, and it is unavoidably a loss to see it happen. But it doesn't mean that it needs to be simply said to be a problem and nothing else. People can still enjoy talking about those things, and people can still have a nice time after they realize such orders of nature, such realities, so to speak. I don't know. I think so. Anyway, I think to a certain degree, I fear that I might have said overly too much. That's kind of the funny point of being here. At some point, I feel like I say too much stuff and I go too fast. Even more, I know, because when I get angry, I tend to speak even faster. So it ends up being quite problematic. Let's do this. Let me drink some water. I will try to think for a second. How much stuff did I cover? And how much did I really miss out on mentioning? Still. But yeah. At least the most important parts haven't covered so far. But yeah, I think I did mention most of the things after all. It's quite funny to see that. I think I did rush. I mean, I was looking at the clock and out of nowhere, I think there were points in which I felt like I was speaking for like 10 minutes in a row, and just like 2 minutes passed between topic and topic. I think I might have said too much stuff of even very rapidly. I hope it was fucking understandable. Yeah. maybe not. Maybe I fucking mispronounced like half of the stuff. Maybe. But yeah, most of the important ideas I think were delivered. Not in the best way, but were mentioned in any way. So yeah, trying to understand now everything that I said so far, then yeah. It happens that the educational system itself provides you with a lot of different ideas. I think, okay, I didn't say this exactly with these words. I did mention that in a different manner. That is, you cannot express the objective of something like the educational system inside of the educational system itself, because there is a certain problem that arises when you do so, and that is you also gain awareness of how it works and where it is trying to aim. So if you are being given that, you might not want to fully follow the path that is being shown to you. So there are many implicit messages and meta narratives that you are following when you are also following any kind of educational course. So it doesn't happen that you gain the possibility of finding them directly explained to you. But we did mention many of them here along the lines of how any kind of educational system tries to show to you not only that cooperation is a necessary part of existence, not only that you can learn and that you have the possibility of rising above the average, because that is the fundamental part of that. The most fundamental part of how an educational system is created since so long ago is it aims to the lowest performing kind of people. As long as you can, so to speak, perform the logical arguments well enough inside of your own head about the things that you are learning, you will unavoidably be capable of absorbing the information. It doesn't get said enough times that indeed the different types of discussion that happen around the whatever subject that you're observing will require time and patience to be processed, but nothing else. There isn't any kind of mystery to that. There isn't any kind of divine force acting in secret to assist people to understand them better or anything of that sort, sadly. You might want to use an argument like that the moment in which you try to give up. After all, what is going to be more satisfactory than to say, yeah, this thing which literally no one can control alters how other people have an easier time learning. That's going to be better. That is being helpful. No, I should be helpless. I should defeat my own interest and I should position myself in obviously a place of less capacity compared to others. That is obviously going to allow me to gain so much, and that is going to let my own subjective experience feel so incredibly good because I am attacking myself constantly with the way that I portray myself compared to others. That is better, certainly, and that is more useful, I guess. All of that narrative, all of those ideals are nothing more than sadly things which people needs to dispose of but are not given the proper tools. I do we talk about education. I do see some failures, at the very least from the place that I am standing in nowadays, and that is there is a huge lack of interest of also showing people that they need to properly take care not only physically but mentally of themselves. There isn't anything like the loss of potentiality because of what I just described. So people out of nowhere negatively referring to themselves, diminishing your own capacity simply because you had one or two bad times. The moment in which you see it as an okay thing to do, to go against so many of the things that you could be, just because you wanted to somehow defeat your own potential, so to speak. I do hear about that and I do not like it. There is a certain explanation that works for that. People have the potential of doing many things that they wish to, but also you have the potential of not doing the things that you wish to. And the moment in which you fail to do the things that you had such an easy time in doing, you also gain the negative pleasure of showing those who supported you so much that they were in the wrong, and that you were right when you told them that you were not going to be capable of achieving what they said that was going to be so easy for you. There is that side of the story which can quote unquote explain why people gives up so easily. But it doesn't truly give a meaningful explanation. It simply says, yeah, people simply want to be as contradictory as they can, to the point to which they literally ruin their lives. No, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work completely that way. That is an incredibly naive explanation. The moment in which people lose the proper faith in themselves, the moment in which the different pieces of what should allow anyone to stay afloat are the moments in which you are given the obvious realization of, sadly, nobody can move forward in any direction after that. What are you going to do if you cannot recover from the loss of one of the many hopes that you had in life? What are you going to do if the moment in which your performance, which you assume to be so great, end up failing so much? What are you going to do at that point? There is literally nothing to do, and there is almost no proper way to regain your aim back towards where you truly were aspiring if you cannot even find it meaningful enough, so to speak. It is one of the most dissatisfactory things to deal with. The confrontation of, I want to gain this, and I want to make sure that I have in my hands this one piece of satisfaction obtained not through any kind of random labor, obtained through my own interest, through my own sweat, through my own efforts. The moment in which somebody has to deal with the realization that, yeah, you failed to do so, is the moment in which so many people crumble unavoidably, and in which so many people will keep on struggling after all. There is nothing as complex as trying to have a proper aspiration and following through that. There is, I have said it here in a different way. You can realize what your objective is. The problem is being capable of following through on your objective. What are you willing to truly sacrifice 10,000 hours on what you wish to? You know that with 1 hour it won't work. You know that with 10 hours it won't work. You know that with 100 hours it won't work. You are not even sure if with 1,000 hours it will function the way in which you wanted it to go. Are you willing to in any way try to spend 10,000 hours on what you truly say that you want? And that's where it fails unavoidably. That's where the efforts end up floundering, so to speak, when you realize sadly that people have so many difficulties even finding out something that I spent 10,000 hours, 20,000 hours doing something, and even when it failed, I am satisfied with that, not because the failure is good, but rather because I can realize in any kind of way that what I did was good, because the experience was completely justified. Every single hour doing that which I used to do, spending my life on the pursuit of that, was meaningful enough. It is one of the many losses of the aspirations of anybody to say, yeah, you don't need to have anything like that. Yes, you do. Not that you need to. You have the right to have any kind of aspiration like that one. And it is completely negative to abandon an spirit like that one simply because, yeah, I am having such a complex time right now. It doesn't work that way, and you cannot give up the moment in which any minimally negative piece of experience happens. The human isn't made to give up so easily. The tools that are at the disposal of anyone are not like that. There is a thousand different examples that you can refer yourself to which show anybody who can wish for good things, even in the worst of the situations, can survive them. What will make you believe that you are not going to be like everyone else? It doesn't mean, and that is one of the, I guess, failures of the modernity, that, yeah, everybody is incredibly unique. No, you can't be that unique. You cannot out of nowhere place yourself in a place in which out of nowhere you you are completely devoid of the possibilities that everyone else has. And the most important realization of that is, and the biggest factor, the biggest creator of possibilities is will. Are you willing to do something? Are you interested in accomplishing anything or not? That's what matters the most. If you can properly justify something, if you can properly create a way towards something, then it will happen. Unavoidably, it will happen. But it's better to say, yeah, it doesn't work that way. It won't work that way. It won't come to reality that way. You know, it's better to settle down with everyone else who also thinks the very same way, because after all, it's once again the type of suffering of having seen somebody achieve what seemed to be so impossible for you, and seeing it be gone out of nowhere from your hands. But I don't know, man. I don't think it is truly the point. The comparison at any degree like that. I think so. But yeah, I don't know. I think I am satisfied with what I said. Uh, I think, yeah. I think at least for today, I am satisfied with what I said. I don't I don't really have that many more words, I guess. Um, I guess I don't know. It should be obvious, no? That efforts, try something, aspire towards somewhere, make the way, lead the fucking way, create your own way. That's what matters. No matter where you come from, no matter which situation creates you, effort is what defines the most everything else. To be tied down to your place of origin, the people that surrounds you, it doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't help you at all. They are factors, but they are not the defining factor in any kind of dream that you have. I think that's the problem. Settling down so much for other things, like everyone else, I guess. Yeah, I think I don't have really anymore. Anyway, I guess I am satisfied with this one. And yeah, I I mainly covered the most important part. That was education. That is the second part of today. Education. Get yourself educated. Please learn to look past simply the things that constitute you and look towards what you could be. That's, I guess, what I tried to mean to any degree. Please. But yeah, nothing else to add. Thank you very much. No, yeah. I try to keep thinking out anything to say. Not that much more, I guess. The most important thing has already been said. Have a nice one, I guess. That's what matters. Be happy. Happiness. Be okay. Be in the pursuit of happiness, and the pursuit of happiness which truly should concern you is the good kind of happiness, which most people don't even try to think about. But the problem is, it doesn't mean that you can think about it. It simply means that you are accepting once again that you are conforming yourself with your surroundings. You are more than capable of thinking about almost any single thing. Almost anything. Simply that you can realize it or not is a completely different topic. Find something truly meaningful. Find something meaningful, yes. And yeah, I guess the problem is, what is meaningful? That that you have to define it by yourself, you know? Nobody can tell you what is meaningful. Even if the reality is, yeah, people can come and tell you. The moment in which you adopt somebody else's definition, there is this psychological piece of information. The moment in which you accept the definition that somebody else gave about what is meaningful, you are also imposing onto yourself the abandonment of what you might consider meaningful for your own sake. At the moment in which you do that, you're started to subdue your own subconscious mind to attach towards something that you might not truly want. And the longer you keep on subduing yourself, the more pain you generate in your own person, so to speak, no matter what you're aspiring towards. And the problem is, inside of all of that discussion, that people forget. And you can relearn, reconsider, and re-aim towards something that is truly meaningful and good. Because it is true. Some people aspire things which are completely negative. Some people, as they will say, aspire to see the world burn. It's true. But it also doesn't mean, or even if it is true, it doesn't mean that others can aim towards something meaningful and something important beyond that, and something that is satisfactory, not just for themselves to obtain, you know? But yeah, anyway, now for real, nothing else, I guess. I mean, I do have something, but it 11 minutes ago, thank you, Cosmic Adventure, how to follow. Also, excuse me for going on so long without acknowledging that. At the very least, I do know that it happened on screen because it sounded, but I was too too much saying something. I don't even know what at that point, but I was simply going on and on. Anyway, okay, can we do this? People is I don't even know. Can I write from here? Do we have that possibility? Pop out? What the fuck? Ah, no. I opened the stream together. Wow. Wait, Raid is portrayed with a. What's this image? What? With a. What the hell is that? With a parachute? It makes sense. The worst part, it makes sense. It completely makes sense that you are raiding, therefore you are dropping by. That's so meaningful. Anyway, this guy is live. This guy is live. People, somebody who also does some kind of philosophy. It's this guy. Go watch this guy. Can I? Did I start the fucking right? Did the fucking right? Can somebody confirm? Can somebody tell me? Because it took me to a completely different page. This is so fucking fun. I don't even know if the raid is starting. Fuck. I love it so much. Is no okay. Thank you so much for not telling me. Fucking. It didn't tell me. So I guess we didn't raid. I will have to copy the name by hand. So funny. This is. Thank you so much for being so functional, Twitch. Anyway, in the meanwhile, I guess. Also, hello and goodbye, Momo. Sorry, sorry for the just ending, but I guess yes, potato chip. I think I didn't raid, so let me do that now. This guy, philosophy also. I think so. So, anyways, people, have a nice one. Rest, be happy, hydrate, aims, be capable of aiming towards something good. And yeah, your efforts are meaningful, and you fucking know it. Stop asking other people about it. Just keep on doing it until it pays back. Anyway, have a nice one. Probably tomorrow. I have this week free, so probably tomorrow I'll be back. If I'm not back, I won't say assume I died, because that's too fucking dark. But assume that I don't know, I imploded. That's less dark. Thank you. Anyway, have a good one, and I cannot raid. I cannot go with the raid because it fucking doesn't work. I love it so much. Anyway, goodbye. Raid now.